When we think about the correctional officers, many times on many programs on television and on the radio, they're portrayed sometimes as the good guys. They're there to help the prisoners, to keep everybody safe. What's your experience about the role they play generally, but maybe specifically with some of the kids that you talk to for the book? I mean, have there been instances of abuse and harassment that you're aware of?
It's kind of a complex topic for me because when I first went in, I had very much the opposite of what you're saying. I felt that the kids were the victims and that any correctional staff was sort of the victimizers.
And again, that's not my view, just how often I see them portrayed on television.
Correct, yeah. And I think the media does two things. It's either they make them into sadists or they make them into kind of the good guy or sort of like they're upholding the law.
Yeah.
But as I began to work, I began to realize that more and more that the COs were in many ways not too different in life experience from the young guys that I was dealing with. They had just perhaps more resources or that allowed them not to sort of tip and go completely over to the other side. And I sort of had an experience of seeing both people who were very concerned, working with young people in particular, who would go out of their way. They weren't softies as they were worried that they would be seen. They really expressed a lot of concern. They did things to make sure that kids were safe, talked to them straight about what they needed to do to straighten themselves out. But yet I also saw people that were essentially, they kind of fit the stereotype that they were gratuitously negligent, assertive and aggressive, provocative. And
what's an example? What if you had to think of maybe one of the most egregious examples of that you're aware of, maybe from the book? What would that be?
Well, I can remember that there was one CO that I worked with who was in charge of the solitary confinement cell, and his whole point was that he was there to just keep these guys locked up. So any effort to bring them schoolwork or give them anything that would be considered entertainment, I suppose, he was very negative on that. And he himself was breaking the department's rules, in that he would tell me things were not allowed that I knew that were allowed. So there was just this sense of entitlement on his part, that he wasn't going to give out to anybody, and that includes civilians, inmates, and even I've seen him with his fellow workers.
And physical abuse that you've witnessed?
This physical abuse was probably always considered within the realm of what was allowed, but I saw kids, shackled, taken down by what was called the emergency response team, and very often the physical response seemed to be exaggerated to the situation, and often exacerbated what exactly was going on.
So you brought up solitary confinement, which is another whole can of worms to discuss. When I think about solitary confinement, it seems to me a situation where somebody could go in there mentally okay, but already in prison, and the conditions there could have them coming out in a mental state that would certainly set them up for disaster, right? I mean, am I wrong about that? The conditions of solitary confinement themselves can create problems.
Right. Yeah. And actually, the jail that I worked in, and I write about this in a chapter in the book, is that the solitary confinement was designed in such a way that there was almost a total sensory deprivation, that none of the inmates could see each other. They couldn't communicate except by screaming and yelling through the walls, which they did, although they weren't really being able to make contact with each other. They were at least sort of trying to make some kind of contact. And that slowly, the longer that they were in there, I would see kids just deteriorate, kids who were, pretty articulate and interested in school and kept themselves clean. And then over time, they slept a lot. They allowed themselves, they didn't take showers. They just became really very disoriented.
I mean, how often were they allowed to shower in solitary confinement?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that it was designed that they had all the facilities available within their one cell. So they had a shower,
Gotcha.
A bathroom. So everything was very contained, which also kept them away from other people.
Yeah.
And actually, this particular jail that I was in is being investigated by the Department of Justice. And one of their complaints is that young people were being kept in solitary confinement for inordinate periods of time. And one of the results was exactly what you were saying, a real deterioration of their mental capacities. And they weren't getting services, they weren't getting mental health services, they weren't getting medical services.
What do you think, if you had to sum up, and we have just about a minute left, the biggest problem now with the criminal justice system? Is it, and maybe it's none of these things, but is it the jailing of nonviolent offenders? Is it specifically the conditions? What would you point out?
I'm very disturbed by the whole issue of race and the fact that the proportion of people of color in jails does not match what the population of the particular area that they're in.
And what if it's just the argument that they're committing more crimes, so that's why they're in jail? How would you refute that?
I think that one of the issues is that if you look at the issue of who gets locked up and why they're locked up, you're going to see issues of economics, people who can't make bail, where they come from, the type of legal representation that they have, which often goes along with people of color in terms of being minorities and being disenfranchised.
So in essence, there's an infrastructure that is making it easier and more likely for those people to end up in jail, separate, above and beyond just what portion of the population they make up.
Yes, and I think also public perception.
The book is I Don't Wish Nobody to Have a Life Like Mine, Tales of Kids in Adult Lockup by David Chura, and I'm holding it up for the camera. I got through most of it before the interview, and it is interesting, and I thank you for coming in today.
Good. Thanks very much.
Next, we'll be talking to attorney Bill Newman, ACLU of Massachusetts, about a whole bunch of topics, and our website, of course, midweekpolitics.com.
Midweek Politics with Dave Pakman on midweekpolitics.com.
Midweek Politics is brought to you in part by Jackson & Connor, classically modern men's apparel in Northampton, Massachusetts on the second floor of Thorne's Marketplace, and by DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at difdesign.com. To find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics, visit midweekpolitics.com.